There are films that entertain, and then there are films that burrow so deep into the cultural consciousness that they never quite leave. The Lost Boys is one of the latter. Released in the summer of 1987, Joel Schumacher's vampire masterpiece arrived with leather jackets, neon-soaked boardwalks, and a soundtrack that felt like it was designed to soundtrack the end of innocence itself. But the movie audiences fell in love with almost didn't exist, at least not in the form anyone recognizes today. Behind every iconic frame, every memorable line, and every unforgettable performance lies a production story so chaotic, so riddled with near disasters and last-minute decisions, that it's almost miraculous the film came together at all. These are the secrets that were hidden for decades, and understanding them changes everything about how you see this movie. Before a single vampire appeared on screen, before the motorcycles roared or the saxophone wailed across the beach, the project looked almost nothing like what it eventually became. Richard Donner, fresh off the enormous success of Goonies, originally attached himself to a version of the Lost Boys that was almost shockingly tame by comparison. The vampires in that early vision were playful and mischievous rather than threatening, closer in spirit to misbehaving children than terrifying creatures of the night. The tone leaned toward fantasy and wide-eyed wonder rather than horror, and the characters themselves were significantly younger than the brooding teenagers audiences would eventually meet. There was no edge, no danger, no leather, and no sense of rebellion in those early drafts. It was a supernatural adventure built for family audiences, and it bore almost no resemblance to the genre-defining film that Schumacher would eventually make. The transformation from that initial concept to the final product represents one of the most dramatic creative pivots in 1980 cinema. What most people never realize is that the film's origins reach far beyond standard horror territory into the realm of classic literature. Early drafts of the screenplay drew directly from the mythology of Peter Pan, reimagining the boy who never grew up as a vampire cursed with eternal childhood. Writers fused J.M. Barrie's beloved tale with the seductive immortality explored in Rice's novels, creating a foundation unlike anything the horror genre had attempted before. The title itself wasn't poetic license. It was a literal reference to Barrie's Lost Boys, reborn as bloodthirsty outcasts hiding in the shadows of a California coastal town. That literary DNA gave the project a thematic depth that separated it from typical horror fare from the very beginning. The idea of eternal youth as both a gift and a curse ran through every draft of the screenplay, and even as the story evolved into something darker and more rebellious, that Peter Pan foundation remained woven into its identity. It's what gives the film its haunting quality beneath all the style and spectacle. Warner Brothers stepped in and demanded changes that would ultimately define the movie's entire personality. Studio executives weren't satisfied with the original direction and pushed hard for older characters, a stronger romantic angle, and a tone that would genuinely attract teenage audiences. The Fraud Brothers and Michael were aged up significantly from their earlier incarnations, reshaping the story's dynamic entirely, and giving it a harder, more rebellious edge that would eventually make it iconic. One of the most dramatic changes involved the character of Star, who was originally written as a boy. The decision to completely reimagine Star as a young woman introduced a love interest that hadn't existed in earlier drafts, altering the emotional center of the movie in ways nobody fully anticipated. While studio interference often damages creative projects, in this particular case, it arguably saved the film. The shift from a younger, lighter adventure to a teen-driven vampire story gave the movie its attitude, its cultural relevance, and a rebellious spirit that would inspire passionate devotion for decades to come. Even after the script was in better shape, the casting process nearly unraveled everything before filming could begin. Landing Jason Patric in the role of Michael proved far more difficult than anyone expected, and the story of how it eventually happened is one of the most quietly remarkable in the film's troubled history. Patrick turned the part down repeatedly, genuinely unconvinced that a vampire movie could offer him anything meaningful as an actor. Joel Schumacher refused to accept that answer and began meeting with the young actor almost daily, determined to prove that the project had real artistic merit beneath its genre surface. Over the course of 6 exhausting weeks, Schumacher pitched the film as something stylish, emotionally driven, and unlike anything else being made at the time. He needed Patrick to see past the vampire trappings and recognize a role that could genuinely challenge him. Slowly, that persistence paid off. Patrick eventually joined production and brought a brooding intensity to Michael that grounded the entire story emotionally without his reluctant commitment. The film might have found a very different leading man and a very different heart once Patrick was on board. His influence extended well beyond his own performance. He personally recommended Jamie Gertz for the role of star, a suggestion that reshaped one of the film's most important dynamics. The character had been envisioned quite differently in earlier drafts, but Gertz brought a warmth and vulnerability that completely redefined the part. Her presence added layers of emotional depth the screenplay hadn't fully explored on the page, and her chemistry with Patrick gave the love story real stakes that pulled audiences deeper into Michael's dangerous transformation. Star became more than a plot device or a romantic interest. She became the emotional bridge between the human and vampire worlds, grounding the horror in something deeply personal. It's rare for an actor to influence casting decisions as directly on a major studio production, but Patrick's instinct proved exactly right, and that single recommendation helped give the film an emotional core. Meanwhile, one of the movie's most iconic visual elements came from an equally unexpected source. David's bleached mullet and razor-sharp punk aesthetic weren't part of Joel Schumacher's original vision for the character. Kiefer Sutherland took matters into his own hands and altered his hairstyle before production began without consulting the director. He drew direct inspiration from Billy Idol's punk image, wanting David to radiate danger and untamed energy from his very first frame on screen. The result was immediate and undeniable. David went from a standard villain role to something far more magnetic, a figure who communicated cool menace without saying a single word. Schumacher recognized instantly that Sutherland's instinct was right and embraced a new direction completely. That spontaneous creative decision gave the film one of its most enduring visual identities and helped establish David as one of the decade's most iconic screen villains. The best creative choices are sometimes the ones nobody planned at all. Sutherland's dedication to the role came at a genuine physical cost that the production team managed to conceal almost perfectly. During the filming of an intense motorcycle sequence, Sutherland insisted on performing his own stunt and crashed hard after striking a hidden track on the set. The impact broke his left wrist, creating an immediate crisis that threatened to derail the entire schedule. Rather than shutting down production, the crew engineered a series of clever workarounds that kept everything moving. The motorcycle's controls were shifted to accommodate his right hand, gloves were added to his wardrobe, and cinematographers carefully framed every subsequent shot to keep the cast hidden from view. The adjustments were so seamless that audiences watching the finished film never suspected anything had gone wrong. Sutherland continued performing to the pain without breaking character or slowing the schedule, and that hidden injury remained one of the production's best-kept secrets for years after the film's release. The production nearly lost one of its most beloved cast members under circumstances that speak to both the challenges of filmmaking and the importance of second chances. Corey Feldman arrived on set one day visibly impaired, and Joel Schumacher responded by letting him go on the spot. For a brief moment, it appeared that Edgar Frog would need to be recast entirely, a change that could have dramatically altered the film's chemistry and taken something genuinely irreplaceable out of the final product. Schumacher didn't let the situation end there, however. After learning more about the personal struggles behind the incident, he reconsidered his decision and brought Feldman back with firm, direct warning about what another misstep would mean. That moment of tough compassion proved essential not just of production, but of Feldman's performance itself. He returned focused and delivered a turn that became one of the most beloved elements of the entire film. Without Schumacher's willingness to reconsider, the movie might have lost something it never could have recovered. On a lighter note, the film quietly gave birth to one of the most famous partnerships in 1980s teen entertainment. The Lost Boys marked the very first time Corey Feldman and Corey Haim worked together, and their connection was immediate and unmistakable from the moment they began sharing scenes. The genuine friendship they developed during production translated directly into their performances, giving their characters a natural, unforced dynamic that audiences responded to instantly. That authentic chemistry launched a multi-film collaboration and a cultural phenomenon that defined an era of teen cinema. But it all started here, on this particular set, with a chance pairing that neither actor could have predicted would shape both of their careers so profoundly and personally. The famous beach party scene that opens the film was designed to feel wild and uncontrollable, and behind the cameras, it genuinely was. Bonfires blazed across the sand. Extras moved in every direction, and Tim Capello delivered his now legendary shirtless saxophone performance with an intensity that electrified everyone present. Cast members later admitted they felt completely overwhelmed on the first day of that shoot, unprepared for just how chaotic and alive the set actually was. Schumacher leaned into that chaos rather than trying to contain it, encouraging improvisation and letting the unpredictable atmosphere drive the scene's energy and rhythm. Extras and crew members fed off Capello's live performance, and the result was a sequence that felt less like a scripted movie moment and more like a real event captured on film. That rawness became a defining quality of the scene and of the film as a whole, a reminder that some of the best cinema comes from controlled chaos rather than careful planning. Financial pressure forced one of the production's most creative solutions at a moment when the budget simply couldn't support the ambitious aerial footage the story demanded. Flying vampires were central to the film's appeal, but elaborate aerial sequences were expensive, and the money wasn't there. The solution came from an unlikely archive, and used footage originally captured for Top Gun. A brief point-of-view aerial shot was pulled from that production and seamlessly inserted into The Lost Boys, selling the illusion of vampire flight, without spending money the production didn't have. Most viewers never noticed the difference or questioned the shot's origin, and that small act of creative recycling became one of the smartest behind-the-scenes decisions of the entire shoot. It's a reminder that resourcefulness and imagination can accomplish what budgets alone sometimes cannot. The location chosen for filming carried a weight that no production designer could have manufactured artificially. Santa Cruz, California, where the boardwalk sequences were shot, had once earned the genuinely unsettling label of the murder capital of the world following a string of notorious crimes in the early 1970s. To avoid controversy and protect the local community, the filmmakers renamed the town Santa Carla in the film, allowing them to reference the location's dark reputation without directly implicating the real place. The famous billboard reading "Murder Capital of the World" was a direct nod to that actual history, blending fiction and reality in a way that gave the story an authenticity no invented setting could have provided. Santa Cruz's real darkness seeped into every frame, and audiences could feel it even without knowing the full backstory. Beneath the surface of even the smallest creative decisions lay a level of intentionality that reveals just how carefully crafted this film truly was. The makeup artist V. Neal made the deliberate choice to mix glitter into the fake blood used on the vampire characters, wanting the creatures to feel ethereal and otherworldly rather than simply monstrous. Under certain lighting conditions, the blood would catch and shimmer, creating a subtle supernatural quality that registered subconsciously rather than consciously for most viewers. These weren't creatures designed purely to repulse. They were seductive and visually captivating, as much rock stars as predators, and the glitter blood was one small piece of a larger aesthetic vision that made the film's vampires feel genuinely unlike anything the genre had produced before. Creating an authentically unsettling atmosphere in the vampire cave required choices that extended well beyond clever set design. The production team released thousands of real, sterilized flies directly into the enclosed set to generate a genuinely disturbing swarm effect that no mechanical device could convincingly replicate. Actors didn't need to fake their reactions, because the flies crawling on every surface and buzzing constantly through the air created genuine discomfort that permeated the entire set. Cast and crew members recalled how deeply unpleasant the experience was. Even knowing the insects were harmless, and controlling the aftermath proved more difficult than anyone anticipated. Some of the flies reportedly escaped into surrounding production areas and caused considerable chaos. But the authenticity captured on camera made every moment of off-screen misery worthwhile. Hidden within the film's creature design is one of its most playful inside jokes. When it came time to create the vampire look for Edward Herrmann's character Max, the makeup team based the facial features subtly on director Joel Schumacher himself. The resemblance was intentional and quickly became a running joke among the crew. Schumacher reportedly loved the idea, embracing the notion of having quietly inserted himself into film as its most powerful and sinister villain. It's the kind of detail that never made it into any official press materials of the time and remains one of the film's most obscure Easter eggs, a reflection of the loose, playful creative atmosphere that defined the production from beginning to end. Some of the film's most elaborate practical effects work never reached audiences at all. Full-body puppets were constructed for more graphic vampire death sequences that Schumacher ultimately cut after deciding they disrupted the pacing and tipped the tone too far toward pure horror. He wanted the film to maintain its careful balance between thrills, humor, and style, and the more extreme footage threatened to undermine that balance entirely. The unused death scenes have since become one of the film's most discussed mysteries, with fans speculating for decades about what those sequences looked like and whether they might have changed the final product reception. Schumacher's instinct to prioritize pacing over shock value is widely credited with helping the movie achieve the remarkably broad appeal that has kept it relevant across generations. An ambitious closing sequence was also planned and ultimately abandoned due to budget constraints. The concept involved a final shot revealing a mural depicting Max recruiting young boys into his vampire circle during the early 1900s, suggesting centuries of predatory behavior and dramatically expanding the villain's backstory. The idea was discussed seriously during development, but the period-specific production requirements pushed it beyond what the budget could absorb. The filmmakers also concluded, practically speaking, that the existing ending was strong enough to stand without additional exposition. Still, the unrealized concept remains a fascinating window into how much deeper the creative team wanted to take the mythology, and what audiences might have discovered had the financial circumstances been different. Fresh off the film's commercial success, plans were set in motion for a follow-up that would have taken the franchise in a dramatically unexpected direction. Rather than a traditional sequel, the studio commissioned a prequel set during the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, exploring Max's origins and revealing how he built his vampire empire amid one of the most catastrophic natural disasters in American history. A full screenplay was written with real creative momentum behind it, but shifting studio priorities and the considerable challenges of mounting a large-scale period piece eventually stalled the project indefinitely. The unproduced script remains one of the franchise's most intriguing what-ifs, a tantalizing glimpse of the story that might have reshaped everything audiences thought they knew about the film's central villain. The film's most lasting contribution to popular culture may be the way it permanently altered the trajectory of vampire storytelling. Before 1987, vampires in mainstream cinema were aristocratic figures rooted in centuries of Gothic tradition. They wore capes, inhabited crumbling castles, and spoke with refined European accents. The Lost Boys shattered that mold entirely and without apology. Its vampires wore leather, rode motorcycles, and looked like rock stars rather than nobles. That reinvention didn't just redefine the genre for one film. It changed vampire storytelling across all media for years to come, opening a door that countless creators eagerly walked through. Joss Whedon openly cited the film as a foundational influence when developing Buffy the Vampire Slayer, acknowledging that its blend of teen drama and supernatural horror helped shape his creative vision from the earliest stages. Even the specific visual device of vampires shifting between human and monstrous faces, a signature of the Buffy series, came directly from this film's approach to its undead characters. That influence extended even further than most fans realize. When Buffy introduced Spike, audiences noticed immediately the bleached hair, punk attitude, and magnetic swagger that defined him from his first appearance. What many didn't recognize was how directly those traits had been inherited from David. The visual and tonal parallels between the two characters are striking and clearly intentional, a creative lineage connecting 2 decades of vampire storytelling through a shared aesthetic of rebellious cool. Kiefer Sutherland's performance helped establish an archetype that James Marsters would later reimagine and celebrate to enormous effect, proving that a single characterization in a 1987 horror film could echo across the entertainment landscape for decades. Spike became one of the most beloved characters in television history, but his creative DNA traces directly back to a California boardwalk. The influence continued surfacing in unexpected places well into the modern era. In his acclaimed 2019 horror Film Us, Jordan Peele included a quiet reference to filming near the carousel at Santa Cruz, a subtle tribute that only devoted fans of The Lost Boys would recognize. Peele has confirmed the nod was entirely intentional, born from genuine admiration for what the original film accomplished and what it continues to mean to the genre. When one of the most celebrated horror directors of the 21st century deliberately pays homage to a nearly 4-decade-old vampire movie, It speaks volumes about the depth and durability of its cultural footprint. Even the Frog Brothers' names contain a hidden layer that most audiences completely missed. Edgar and Allan Frog were named as a deliberate tribute to Edgar Allan Poe, with the legendary author's name split across two characters in a move that embedded a rich literary reference directly into film's most entertaining duo. The nod connected the movie to a centuries-old tradition of Gothic horror storytelling, without ever drawing explicit attention to itself. It's the kind of thoughtful detail that perfectly encapsulates the filmmaker's entire approach, layering genuine craftsmanship beneath a surface designed for pure entertainment and broad mainstream appeal, rewarding those who look closely while never excluding those who simply want to enjoy the ride. What keeps The Lost Boys alive nearly 4 decades after its release is ultimately something no amount of behind-the-scenes ingenuity can manufacture. It's the emotional truth at the film center, the genuine story about belonging, identity, and the terrifying thrill of growing up in a world that doesn't always make sense. The vampires and the stunts and the glitter blood and the borrowed aerial footage all serve something deeper and more lasting than spectacle alone. Every near disaster, every last-minute decision, every injury and creative gamble and studio mandate contributed to a film that transcended its genre and refused to stay in its decade. The Lost Boys didn't just survive the years. It earned its immortality one new fan at a time, proving that great storytelling never truly ages, no matter how long ago the cameras stopped rolling.